Kevin Dunn, and I'm a Los Angeles-based flight attendant, and I was working Flight 11 on the morning of November 19th, 1998. I was working with 4 flight attendants who were also Los Angeles-based. Mara Swanson, Cheryl Gurley were working the first class cabin, and I was working in coach with Carrie Castle. About 1 hour east of Denver, passenger call light went off, and I looked up in the mid-cabin, and I saw a passenger motioning very quickly for me to come forward. I ran to the center of the cabin and looked at the person that he had identified, and there was a passenger, an elderly male in the C seat on the 757 who was in distress. His color was ashen and gray. His wife was slapping him on the cheek and he was not responding. His eyes were rolled back into his head, his tongue was curled against the roof of his mouth, and his mouth was open. So I knew at that point there was great distress here, or he had had the omelet earlier in the morning for breakfast. Since there was no response from his wife slapping him, I reached behind and yelled for males to help me lift the passenger. Nobody responded immediately, so I pulled him over the armrest onto the floor. And once I had him on the floor, I realized that this was no longer training, this was the real deal, and this guy needed my help. And I tilted his head back and put 2 breaths into him and saw his chest rise, so I knew there was no obstruction in his airway. At that point, an excellent example of crew coordination, the physician who had been paged while I was pulling the passenger out of the seat had already arrived at the scene, and it was like the whole crew was ready for this event. It's like we had been waiting, and this was a test flight, and we were just waiting for somebody to say go, because everyone just did, we all scattered, and we did what needed to get done. I started the compression count for CPR, and I did the rescue breathing. The physician did the compressions, the physician who had arrived, and we did 2 sets of CPR on the passenger. We continued, I did another 2 sets of CPR, and I grabbed the pads for the AED and applied them to the passenger's chest after ripping his shirt off. At this point, when the pads were applied, the AED was audibly saying, "Apply pads, apply pads." I knew the pads were on, I smoothed them down again, and it still was saying, "Apply pads." So I asked for a flight attendant to help me with the AED. Mara Swanson responded, and she unplugged the pads, plugged them back in, and this cleared the machine. So at this point, it said, "Analyzing, shock advised, stand clear." What we did at that point, when we were trying to clear everyone away from the area in order to administer the first shock, the passenger's wife put her body on top of his, threw her body on top of his. She was either trying to protect him or say goodbye. She wasn't sure what was about to happen. We got her off the body, but in that split second, we had lost the heartbeat. So we did another set of CPR, and then on the readout for the AED, we saw that we had heart action. It again said, "Stand clear." We were yelling to people to get away from the body, and that seemed to be very effective. Everyone stepped away. The first shock was administered. We did 2 more sets of CPR. I was doing the compression count again and doing the breathing, the physician doing the compressions. And the AED audibly said, "Stand clear, shock advised." We shocked him a second time. Again, we lost almost immediately heartbeat and pulse. We continued, did 2 more sets of CPR. We shocked him a third time. Again, after the third shock, we maintained the heartbeat and pulse for a very short period of time, then lost it. The passengers around the area, there was a lady praying on her tray table in the same row that I was kneeling next to, and there was a lot of confusion. There was elation when we would shock and they would see a bit of response from the body, and then there was a lot of depression immediately after when they saw us doing CPR again. So we had a lot going on, and there were people yelling in the area and screaming, and at that point I noticed blood freely flowing from the passenger's right ear, and I didn't know where it came from. We shocked the passenger a 4th time after 2 more sets of CPR, and at this point he revived and he was resuscitated, and we were able to maintain the heartbeat and the pulse. The passenger was seizing violently and screaming at the top of his lungs, either in pain or just very unaware of what was happening to him. He was not rational. We tried to speak with him and yell back to him. He was not responding. At that point, because we were a few minutes from landing, I asked 3 passengers, including the physician that had been doing the compressions, to hold the passenger's limbs down while we were landing. We landed in Denver and taxied very quickly to the gate. The passenger was met by paramedics who rushed onto the plane and took him off. He turned to me before he got off the plane and asked for a glass of water. And 15 minutes after we were at the gate, we were advised that the passenger was alive and well at the hospital, and the passengers gave us an ovation. They couldn't believe that the flight attendants had done what they did through CPR and the help of the AED, brought this person back from being dead to the point where he could ask for a glass of water and be alive and well at the hospital.